to Creativity and the Mind, a podcast where we discuss ways in which working professionals have found ways to implement creativity into their field. Today, I am joined by Gideon Coffey. Gideon, why don't you tell me about yourself and some of your accomplishments?
First off, thank you for having me on here. So I'm Gideon Coffey. I went to grad school for psychology, and I have been a therapist for 5 years. And recently, I started an organization to help teach all students in schools about mental resilience and emotional intelligence.
And did you always know that you wanted to go into psychology?
Actually, no, I didn't. I'm sure it was something that had been on my mind for a long time, but I went to school at first for middle childhood teaching, and then my senior year of undergrad, I realized how important psychology was to me, and I decided to go to grad school for psychology instead of going into teaching.
And what made you change your mind?
Well, there's a lot of things, just life experiences and working on teaching myself. One big thing that really gave me the opportunity to think about what it would be like to be a therapist was a class I took senior year called CCA 111.
And could you tell us a little bit more about CCA 111?
Of course, it's a creativity and design class. It was a beginner level course, and it was interesting because the class was about how to design your life and also do real design. And the first half of the semester, we just talked about creativity, what creativity looks like, how to refine our creativity, and how to let our minds wander, and not just getting stuck on the first idea that you came up with, but instead coming up with multiple different ideas, having divergent and convergent thinking.
So aside from focusing more on this idea of divergence, what was your favorite activity or takeaway from this class?
Yeah. The first one, there's two. The first one is called Assumptions and Prototypes. Everyone has assumptions, and I am notorious for constantly assuming something about myself or about the world and going off of those assumptions and just going, well, I'll be so good at this, and that's it. I'll be good at it. But this assignment challenged this idea of assumptions, and it said, okay, if you think you're good at it, like, come up with all the different assumptions you have about your future and about your hopes, and make a prototype about it. Come up with a simple task that you can do now, that you can do in a week's time, that can show you that those assumptions are true. So that allowed me to learn about myself and challenge what I was thinking and feeling. And the other one that is a personal favorite of mine, I love doing origami, and I was able to use origami in one of my works where I showed off this idea that all the small things that we do build up to create our environment. So to show that, I had different ideas, different sorry, it's been some time, but it's still stuck in my mind. I'm trying to think. So I came up with different origamis. I had like a person, I made a box, I made a rose and a tulip, I made a goose, and each of them represented different parts of my future that I hoped to achieve and that I wanted to get to, and they all came together to make a picture of a person next to flowers and next to standing on top of a box. And that idea is, in our future, as we come up with new ideas in our future, we create a better environment for ourselves.
Very cool. So, playing off of this idea of creativity and how this class assisted you in implementing the idea of creativity into your work, how does this idea play out now in your professional life as a therapist?
Yeah. So as a therapist, every client that you work with is different. Each one is very unique. And school allows you to learn about the basics of humanity. But when working with a client, you have to be creative. You have to come up with different ways to walk alongside them, really, and build them up. Because every person is going to want to be built up in a different way. And so I have to constantly remind myself that I may think I know the answer, but I don't always. And really, the only person who can ever truly know the answer is the client. Yeah.
So it sounds like your job takes a lot of resilience and a lot of working through failed attempts.
Yeah, it does. And I love that you bring that up because I think resilience and failure are both really important because failure can destroy someone or build them up depending on how they see failure. Someone who thinks they must be perfect all the time, which for the longest time was me, until I was able to learn about myself in the ways that I try to help my clients learn about themselves. It wasn't until I got emotional resilience, it wasn't until I learned to let go of the failures and just to learn from them and build myself up, that really my life just changed after that, after I was able to have the emotional resilience to see failure as a good thing. Hi, you still with me?
Yeah, it looked like the internet was going to cut out for a second, but we're still here. Okay. So, building on this idea of resilience and failure, and you talked a lot about how you had to work through learning to accept failure and finding different ways to be okay with this and learn from it and build upon it. Would you agree that it's fair to say that it took a bit of creativity in order to find ways to do that?
Yeah, you have to constantly be thinking outside the box and coming up with new ways so that you don't fail every time.
So in that process, what do you think your biggest struggle would have been in trying to implement creativity?
Yeah, I think for me, that's a good question. For me, the biggest struggle that I have when implementing creativity is being willing to try a new idea and not getting stuck in what I already know, but instead learning about what I know and coming up with new ideas that are outside the box. I like to a lot of times stick with what I know, but you can't just stick with what you know. You have to keep learning. You have to keep growing. So I think it's really important. It's really important to have creativity and come up with new ideas and implement those new ideas. I oftentimes struggle with that the most, and I have to remind myself each day to try new things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, well, that is all we have time for today. Thank you for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having me. It was a great time. Love talking about my life. All right. Have a good day.